What do you do when the only thing left of someone you loved is a horse they left behind?
Frost pressed thin under her boots, and the smell of hay moved through the empty stable like the memory of a laugh. Wind found gaps in the boards and sang a soft, accusing song. It was late November. The farm had folded itself small, shutters pulled, the pickup covered in gray, and the herd that had once curved around the yard now shuffling a field away. She, Sarah, moved like someone who had learned to be small in public and large only in the silence of rooms. She did not tell stories about the man she had lost. She told his things. She brushed the saddle that smelled faintly of smoke. She fed the same oats at the same time, as if timing might stitch a seam through days. When she passed the tack room, the door made a whisper that sounded like his name. The horse came before she saw him. The first impression was the air around him, a soft, steady sound, the patient exhale of an animal certain it will remain alive. He stood half in shadow beneath the lean-to, one ear swiveling like a question. He was a herd leader by habit. Broad-chested, a crooked blaze down his face, the slow way he shifted weight as if counting the world. His coat held what light there was. It did not shine so much as keep things honest. Sarah had come out to check fences. She had not planned to meet grief in the shape of muscle and eye. Her throat tightened in a way she had not intended. She smelled him, woods, river mud, and a trace of apple. And the scent pressed at a place that still hurt. She froze and, for the first time in months, let herself stand without trying to fix anything. She watched him watch the horizon and matched his slow breathing. Something in that rhythm made her heart less jagged. He did not come running. Herd leaders save their rush for moments that matter. He tilted his head and blinked. One careful step. A nostril brushed the air. Then he moved closer and laid his muzzle level with the peg where the old halter hung. He sniffed the leather as if checking for a history he might recognize. Sarah had not meant to touch him. She meant only to pass by to tally fence posts. But the finger on her left hand, the one that still found the scar on her wedding band, rose and drifted to the horse's neck. The hair there was rougher than she expected, warm and truthful. When her palm settled, the animal let out a breath that sounded like relief. There was nothing dramatic about that first contact. No thunder. No miraculous curing of anything. It was a slow, practical exchange, like two people agreeing to share an umbrella. He leaned his cheek into her hand and closed his eyes as if asleep inside the sound of her palm. She thought absurdly that he could tell when people left, could read the hollow in a person's chest and map the empty space with his muzzle. "Who's a good boy?" She whispered because the words wanted a home. He answered with honest horse movements, ears rotating to listen to her voice, not the wind. He exhaled, then nudged her once, a precise, gentle push, and held his head there like a promise. It felt like an unpaid debt being returned. It felt like someone handing back a key. There were oddities. He flinched at a distant chainsaw. His eyes tracked shapes Sarah could not see. When she led him toward the water trough, he paused at a particular board in the fence and mouthed the splintered edge, as if tasting a name. She watched his lips move and felt a prickle down her spine. The farm had old tragedies, trees marked by blight, a rusted gate with a petition sign. Neighbors said, "I'm sorry about him," with hands folded. Sarah had expected polite echoes. She had not expected a horse to carry language of its own. Days became the slow carving of habit. She found excuses to be where he grazed. He was patient. He never demanded more than she offered. When she arrived with a bucket, he would shift his weight and make a small, calming rhythm with his feet. He learned the sound of her boots. When thunder rolled that spring, he did not shy. He planted his feet and watched the sky as if measuring how much to hold her. At night, she slept in a chair in the tack room. The first time she dozed, she dreamed of a hand reaching past a fence and taking a halter. She woke with her palm full of leather, and his face just outside her blanket. He had moved into a groove carved by sadness and kept his shadow beside hers, neither invading nor leaving. Neighbors began to whisper. They noticed the way he let her touch the soft spot behind his jaw. They noticed how he followed her to the gate if she checked the mail. "He's a good horse," they said, surprised. People had seen fences mended by strangers, but not lives mended by creatures. There were nights when sound took the shape of what she'd lost. A car door slammed like a mistake. A laugh on the radio matched a cadence she remembered, and she would press her forehead to the saddle because the leather kept the curve of someone she could not find. The horse would lower his head and rest it near her shoulder. the way someone tells a secret without words. In those exchanges, they built a language out of grazing, breathing, and small, mutual steadiness. Still, the question at the back of her mouth would not go away. Why this horse? Why now? Why would an animal that had the whole field to master stand his body into her shadow and not move on? She would leave the pasture sometimes, and his eyes followed the hem of her coat until she disappeared behind the lane. Once, when she turned to lock the stable, she felt the press of his body at her heel. A warm, calm weight, and for the first time since the funeral, she did not step away. She did not know why. But when she turned to leave, the horse followed. Nights carried small betrayals. In the thin hours, she heard a dog bay across a ravine, a single voice insisting on one direction while the farm held another memory. Sometimes chainsaw coughs came from the far ridge, men working wood, turning trees into teeth. The horse flinched at those noises with a knowledge that did not belong to her. Once she found a faint, healed cut along his shoulder, a pale line like a signature. She traced it with a trembling thumb and felt an ache that made the pasture tilt towards something she had not yet dared to name, and the question stayed, waiting. She kept the letter folded in the pocket of her coat for 3 days. It weighed nothing on paper but felt like a stopped clock each time she brushed against it. The handwriting was his, looped and impatient the way he'd cross a T and then immediately move on, so her hands refused to open it the first 2 times. The third night she pressed her palm flat on the kitchen table and let the light from the lamp make the ink look like a small, patient thing. He had written about the horse, not as an aside, not as a fragment. He had written the story of that horse as if it had been a careful plan that went wrong and then, maybe, right again. He'd wrapped the lines of it around apologies he never managed to say aloud. She read until the sentence edges blurred. There was a logger named Tom, her note said, who worked the ridge trimming the old pines. He kept a dog that could find anything. Lost calves, a rabbit with a GPS of its own, stray hope. They'd been paid to move the herd off a stretch of land before a clear cut. Contracts, they had muttered. Timber to be taken. Horses corralled into the lane. It was work that smelled like diesel and the kind of money that made neighbors nod and look away. But the herd leader, this horse, had another plan. Or someone else did. The dog, Baxter, belonged to Tom. He was a blunt man with a laugh that could sharpen wood. Baxter was supposed to stay the dog's job. Flush, herd, bring the animals into the path. Instead, the note said, Baxter locked eyes with the mare and dropped his shoulders like he was making a decision on behalf of someone who couldn't speak. The dog broke rank, Tom cursed. The chainsaws woke up. Men in orange vests moved like fate. Baxter darted the other way, straight into the brush, barking, then circling the herd leader, then nudging the horse's flank with a knobby nose as if to say, this side, this way. The horse followed the dog away from the cut. Men shouted. The chain of command frayed. Someone struck at Baxter with a gloved hand. Baxter slipped between boot and boot and led them on a wild track across a watershed where the machines couldn't go. The herd escaped. So did their leader. So did the animal she held now. Her breath came shallow. The kitchen light made the ink sparkle. He had written it like a confession. He knew he should have filmed the dogs. He had not called the authorities.
He had watched and not interfered.
He admitted in the margins that he had held Baxter's collar that night and felt like something in his chest had unhooked. He had wanted to keep it private, to carry it in a pocket like a talisman that might explain why he'd been the kind of man to stand quietly while other men decided other people's land. She read the date, the year underlined, the day that fit into the empty place of her life, one she had been walking around like a bruise. She felt the horse shift under her window, the soft scrape of hoof on dirt, a sound that had become a small metronome in her life. When she stepped outside, the air cut clean. The animal closed his eyes as if the moon were a hand. The revelation was not a picture that made everything clear. It was a splinter of light that showed the shape of a thing she had been refusing to name. She had loved a man who had watched a dog choose mercy over contract. She had been angry at a world that could sign away forests and not sign for the things that mattered. But the letter did something else. It gave her the sense that the horse had been saved deliberately, by a creature that disobeyed orders, and not simply carried by the randomness of fate. That knowledge hung inside her as both grief and a small, stubborn gratitude. When she read the last lines, where he had written that Baxter had come to visit the barn once and left a chewed piece of his collar. She walked to the tack room and knelt by the old trunk. There, folded under a clue of rope, was leather. The fragment was cracked, a small nick in it rubbed clean where a dog must have worked at it with teeth. She touched the chew with a finger and felt the heat of memory like a live wire. Her hands began to shake in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. She sank down on the trunk and let herself make a sound that was not speech. Years of being stoic had taught her to swallow and walk. The sound she made then was a different thing, a surrender that was also a claim. She let the letter fall open across her knees and read the lines again as if each word could stitch the man back into being. Outside, the horse shifted and exhaled. Then he moved toward the barn door in the slow, deliberate way herd leaders use to speak without language. He rocked his weight across his knees, the tendon on his flanks like rope pulled taut. He did not press in against her. He stood close enough to be counted, but not to crowd. When she lifted her face, he touched her with the tip of his muzzle and held. It was the precise pressure a body uses to say, "I am here for the long of it." People arrive at their edge for many reasons. For Sarah, the edge came when she finally allowed the letter to fill the hollow left by the man she had loved. She cried. It was not a single seismic collapse. It was the long failing of a dam. Tears arrived slow as weather. The horse lowered his head and let the warmth of his breath move across her jaw. He stood there, a living, steady instrument, until the sound that came from her dried and the room felt rearranged. Rumors moved quicker than she did. Someone came by the fence with a story about Tom and a dog. Another neighbor offered a different ending. Baxter had been hit by a truck months later, a clean accident, and the collar had been all that remained. The herd leader flinched at the name Baxter as if the syllable pressed on an old ache. He searched the hedgerows at night, the way dogs search for a familiar scent. Once, Sarah found him at dawn standing at the ridge where the chainsaws had once waited, his head turned toward the line where trees used to be. He breathed into that space like a prayer. Weeks became the work of small things. She started leaving food at the edge of the pasture at dusk and returning the next morning to find it gone. She learned what the horse liked and what he didn't. She learned the way his muscles tightened before thunder. She learned that he would stand on the fence when a bad neighbor's truck came by. Not because he was brave, but because he had decided to watch. She learned that grief lives in the bones as a timetable. Some days it loosened. Other days it returned. And then, one afternoon, months into the slow stitching of their lives, the horse did something she had not given him credit for. He led her. They were walking the ridge. The sun was low and the world wore its long, honest shadows. He nosed the path with a surety she had not seen before and picked up a rhythm that pulled her like tide. She followed because the horse asked, because she had learned that sometimes being led is a form of trust. He stopped at a place where the brush fell away and revealed a hollow behind a stand of maples. There, beneath a rock, was a rusted can. When she pried it loose, she found, folded around the can's mouth, a photograph and a coin. The photograph was of the man she had loved, laughing, eyes bright, the kind of expression that used to make her chest ache. On the back, in the same impatient script as the letter, was only one line: "Keep him. Keep him safe." She sat down and the horse rested his chin across her knees like an old friend taking a chair. It felt like an apology handed back across time. It felt like a final, small clarifying. You are not mistaken to care for him, and you are not wrong to care for what he loved. Time slid forward. The pasture grew a certain peace. She returned to the town for errands and came back lighter, careful as a person stepping into a room that used to hurt. The horse learned the sound of the pickup and the ring of the gate. When the logger passed by months later, older and quieter, he tipped his hat and touched Baxter's collar around his neck again. An odd habit to keep, and the two men spoke without rancor. The dog's betrayal had been a low, morally complicated thing. It had saved an animal. It had complicated livelihoods. It had left a scar, but it had also left a life. On the last day of that first winter after the letter, she closed the stable, locked the door, and stood in the snow until the horse melted into the silhouette of the barn. Her hands were empty now of letters and leather. She pressed her palm to the wood where his breath fogged the air and thought of the man and the dog and the small, stubborn ways of mercy. Sometimes the ones who save you come with teeth and a knack for getting lost on purpose. Sometimes they don't ask to be thanked. But there was a generosity in being led out of danger by a creature that had once been meant to pull you toward it. If this story touched you, subscribe, leave a comment, and press the bell so you can be here for the next story that just might change your heart. And please, follow, share, and press the bell icon to watch daily videos and enjoy.